The first thing Lieutenant Mark Ellison noticed when he woke up was the silence. No hum of the starship engines, no chatter from his squad's comms, no distant thud of boots in the corridor. Just silence. His head throbbed. The last thing he remembered was the flash of a stun beam on the battlefield of Velis Prime, then falling into darkness. Now, when his eyes finally opened, he realized he was not on Earth's side anymore. The room around him was unlike anything he had seen. The walls were made of some kind of transparent crystal, like glass, but they pulsed faintly with shifting colors, soft blues and greens that moved like waves. The ceiling was high, arching above him in a perfect curve, and strange symbols shimmered across it like drifting clouds. Mark was sitting in a chair that didn't seem to have legs. It floated a few inches above the ground, perfectly still. His wrists and ankles weren't tied, but when he tried to stand, the chair tilted just enough to force him back into place. He scanned the room again. One door, no guards, no visible weapons. That didn't make him feel any better. A soft chime echoed from the far wall, and then the door slid open without a sound. She walked in. Mark had seen Avori before, but never this close. The alien girl, if she was a girl, he guessed she was young, was tall and slender, her skin faintly iridescent, like the inside of a seashell. Her eyes were huge and clear, reflecting the colors of the walls. A crest of fine, feathery strands rose from the crown of her head, glowing faintly gold at the tips. She wore a robe that shifted colors as she moved, almost blending with the room. She didn't look like a soldier, no armor, no weapon. Instead, she carried a smooth, glowing sphere in her hands. Mark straightened, trying to keep his face calm. "So," he said slowly, "you're here to ask me questions, I guess?" She tilted her head, studying him. Her voice, when it came, was melodic but slightly metallic, like music played on glass. "Your name is Mark Ellison, Lieutenant, Earth Defense Corps." He stiffened. "You already know who I am. Why bother talking?" "We talk because your kind prefers it," she said. Then she walked to the center of the room and set the sphere on the table in front of him. It was about the size of a basketball, but inside it swirled lights like miniature storms. Mark's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" She ignored the question. Instead, she gently placed her long, delicate fingers on the sphere. The lights inside flared brighter. "My name is Sarai," she said. "And this is not an interrogation. It is a reading." The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. "Reading?" "Yes." She looked directly into his eyes. "Your mind, your thoughts." He laughed once, sharply. "Sorry, not possible. Humans don't—" Before he could finish, he felt it. Something brushed against his thoughts. Not like a voice in his head, more like someone opening the curtains of a window he didn't know existed. Memories stirred. He saw in the air before him faint shapes forming, a beach from his childhood, the smell of fried fish from his grandmother's kitchen, the gleam of his first cadet medal. He froze. "How—" Sarai's expression didn't change. She kept her hands on the sphere and more images poured out, this time sharper, clearer. His first day in space training, the heat of his squad's barracks, the sound of his best friend laughing during a card game, even his nervous thought when he first saw an Avery years ago. They looked like walking birds made of pearls. Mark's face flushed. "Hey, stop! You can't just—" But it was useless. The moment he thought something, it appeared in shimmering light above the sphere. A puppy he once owned. The taste of cold soda after a long mission. And, unfortunately, the mental image of Sarai herself when she first walked in, how he had compared her crest to a fancy tropical bird's feathers. He groaned. "Great, just great. You're reading my brain like it's a magazine." Sarai finally lifted her hands from the sphere. The images faded, but the sensation of exposure lingered. She didn't look angry or offended. She simply studied him with an unreadable gaze. "You think in colors," she said at last. "Pictures, sensations. Even your memories of pain have warmth to them. This is unusual." Mark tried to force his mind blank, thinking of nothing at all. But that was impossible. The harder he tried, the more random thoughts bubbled up. He wondered how her hair stood like that. He wondered if Avery slept standing up. He wondered what she was thinking right now, and each one flickered briefly in the air between them. Mark swore under his breath. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" A faint tilt of her head. "It is different." He leaned forward slightly. "Is this what you do to all prisoners?" "No." She took a step closer, her robe whispering against the floor. "Usually, we take only the information we need. We are precise, efficient. Your mind is not." "That's called being human," Mark muttered. "Messy," she said, as if testing the word, "but curious." He blinked. "Curious?" She didn't answer. Instead, she placed her hands back on the sphere. This time, she didn't dig deep for classified intel or hidden strategies. Instead, she let the surface of his thoughts spill out like water from a tilted cup. His memories jumped randomly. An old joke from a training officer, the time he tried to make pancakes and set off the fire alarm. A quiet evening watching the stars from his apartment roof. Sarai seemed to study each one like a rare artifact. Mark couldn't take it anymore. "Look," he said, "you can keep poking around in my head, but you're not going to find any military secrets. I'm trained." "I do not want your secrets," she interrupted. He stared at her. "Then what do you want?" For the first time, she smiled, just slightly, like she was still learning how. "I want to understand why your mind is alive in this way." Mark sat back in the floating chair. He had no idea what that meant, but the way she said it made him uneasy. The door behind her slid open, and another Ivori stepped in, this one older, with darker skin and a taller crest. He spoke quickly in their language, glancing at Mark with a look that clearly meant dangerous. Sarai replied calmly, her tone sharp enough that the older one paused, frowned, and finally left without another word. When the door closed again, Mark raised an eyebrow. "What was that about?" Sarai looked back at him, her eyes brighter than before. "You are not a danger to me," she said simply. "But perhaps you are a danger to what we believe." Before Mark could ask what that meant, the lights in the sphere dimmed and the walls around them shifted color, from soft green to a slow, deep gold. The silence returned. Only now, it didn't feel empty. It felt waiting. Mark had been through survival training, weapons drills, and simulations of interrogation. He'd been told 100 times, "Stay calm, don't reveal anything, keep your mind focused on neutral thoughts." Now he realized all of that training meant nothing when your mind was literally an open book to someone else. The problem wasn't that he couldn't stop thinking. Everybody thinks all the time. The problem was that his thoughts jumped in random, stupid directions. 1 second, he was thinking about his squad back on Earth. The next, he was wondering what kind of shampoo Sarai used to make her crest feathers shimmer like that. And the second that thought crossed his mind, it appeared in the air as a shimmering image for her to see. Sarai tilted her head slightly, studying the floating picture of herself with an amused expression. "Your mind produces images faster than I can follow," she said softly. "It is chaotic." "Yeah," Mark said dryly. "Welcome to being human." She didn't laugh, at least not out loud, but her eyes brightened, which he was starting to think was her version of a smile. The sphere between them pulsed faintly. Mark could feel that strange pressure in his mind again, like invisible fingers gently pushing at the doors of his memory. He tried to resist, but resistance just made his brain dig up more random thoughts. He thought of his high school graduation. Then the time he dropped a tray in the mess hall and everyone clapped sarcastically. Then a scene from a movie he saw last month. Each image floated in the air like a hologram, flickering and vanishing after a few seconds. "This is very inefficient," Sarai murmured. "I'm not here to make your job easier," Mark shot back. But she didn't seem frustrated. If anything, she seemed entertained. She moved closer to the sphere, keeping her hands on it as if it was some kind of translator for his thoughts. "You attach emotions to everything," she said. "Every memory is tangled with a feeling. Pride, shame, amusement, regret. Even the ones that should be neutral are not." Mark frowned. "And that's weird to you?" "For my people, yes. We remember events as they were. Facts, clear and separate from emotion. You remember the feeling first and the details second." Mark thought about that for a moment. "Maybe that's why we make art, music, stories, because we feel before we think." Sarai looked at him for a long moment. That could be true. Then, of course, his mind betrayed him again, because right as he was thinking about humans making art, he imagined a quick doodle of Sarai wearing sunglasses and holding a guitar. The image appeared instantly above the sphere, glowing and ridiculous. Mark slapped his forehead. "Oh, come on." Sarai blinked at the floating picture, and then, for the first time, she laughed. Really laughed. The sound was light and musical, like glass bells in the wind. She covered her mouth with one hand, but it didn't hide her smile. "That," she said, still laughing softly, "is not something I have ever seen before." Mark sighed. "Yeah, you're welcome. My humiliation is now interstellar." But her reaction wasn't what he expected. Instead of being annoyed or offended, she seemed delighted, like she'd discovered a rare treasure. "You imagine things that are not real," she said slowly, almost in awe. "But you imagine them so vividly that I can see them. Do you understand how rare that is?" Mark shook his head. "Not really. I thought everyone could imagine stuff." "Not like this," Sarai said. "Most minds I have read show only memories. You create possibilities." Mark thought about that, but before he could respond, another memory bubbled up. This time one he definitely didn't want her to see. It was from his cadet years, when he'd made a clumsy attempt to impress a girl during zero-gravity training. He'd spun around to show off, only to lose control and crash headfirst into the ceiling. The memory came complete with the embarrassed laughter of everyone watching. Mark's face turned red as the scene floated in the air. "Oh no, not this one." Sarai studied the hologram carefully. "You failed," she observed. "Thanks for noticing," Mark muttered. "But you remember it with humor," she continued, "even though it was painful for you. You are forgiving to yourself in your own thoughts. Fascinating." "Yeah, or maybe I just have to laugh at myself or I'd go crazy," Mark said. Sarai's crest feathers shifted slightly, catching the light. "You are different from the others I have read. They hide. They try to control every thought. You do not." "Hey, it's not like I want to share my most embarrassing moments," Mark said quickly. "But apparently my brain thinks, this is a comedy show now." She tilted her head. "And yet you are still here, still speaking, still meeting my eyes. You are not afraid of my judgment." Mark hesitated. "I guess. No. Because even if you see the worst of me, that's still me. And I've lived with me my whole life. That made her pause. Her eyes searched his face as if trying to understand something beyond the words. Finally, she said, "Your honesty is strange, refreshing." The door opened again. This time, two Avori entered, both wearing metallic sashes that marked them as officers. They spoke quickly to Sarai in their fluid, melodic language. One of them glanced sharply at Mark, then at the sphere. Sarai replied calmly, her tone controlled, but Mark caught the faintest edge of defiance. After a short exchange, the two officers left without further comment. Mark raised an eyebrow. I'm guessing they don't approve of this little chat. They think you are wasting my time, Sarai said simply. But I do not agree. Mark leaned back in the floating chair. So, what exactly are you getting out of this? Her answer was immediate. Understanding. She touched the sphere again, and new images began to appear, this time not from Mark's mind, but from hers. They were strange and beautiful. Tall crystal towers rising over silver oceans, flocks of glowing creatures sweeping through a violet. Sky, a great council chamber filled with hundreds of aviary, their crests glowing in unison. Mark stared, amazed. That's your home? Yes, she said. But do you see? These are memories, perfect, clear. They are not tangled with feelings the way yours are. When I remember what was. When you remember what it meant to you. Mark thought about that. Maybe that's why we fight so hard for things. We don't just remember them. We feel them. Sarai's gaze lingered on him for a moment, and then she said quietly, Perhaps that is why you may change more than you know. Mark frowned. Change what? But she didn't answer. Instead, she lifted her hands from the sphere. The images faded, leaving only the two of them in the crystal room. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. Mark could still see the ghost of her smile, and he couldn't help thinking, though he knew she'd see it, that maybe, just maybe, she liked what she'd found in his messy human mind. Mark wasn't used to being stared at for so long. Back on Earth, if someone kept looking at you without blinking, it usually meant a fight was coming, or they thought you had something stuck in your teeth. But Sarai's gaze wasn't hostile. It was focused, almost curious, like a scientist who had just found a new species of star. He sat in the floating chair, trying to keep his mind calm, which was completely pointless. The moment he thought don't think about anything, his brain threw up the image of a dancing chicken wearing a space helmet. The ridiculous vision shimmered in the air between them. Sarai tilted her head at it. What is that? Mark groaned. Something I wish you hadn't seen. Her crest feathers twitched. He was starting to notice that happened when she was amused. It is strange, she said, but it makes me feel lighter. That's called humor, Mark said. It's when something unexpected makes you laugh. She considered this. Humor, she repeated, as if testing the word. We do not have this in the same way. Our minds do not create nonsense for its own sake. Well, you've been missing out, Mark said. Nonsense is one of the best things in life. Her eyes shone with a faint glow. Perhaps. Show me more. He laughed. Show you more? What am I, a comedy generator? But his brain, as usual, ignored his protests. Without meaning to, he thought of his first spacewalk during training, how he had drifted too far from the station and panicked, flailing his arms until the instructor calmly reeled him back in like a caught fish. The memory appeared above the eye sphere in full detail, and he winced. Why do you always show me your failures? Sarai asked. Because my brain is a traitor, Mark muttered. Also, maybe because I learned the most from those moments. Sarai studied the floating image, then turned her gaze back to him. Failures that become lessons, that is rare among my people. We seek to avoid failure entirely. Mark shrugged. Yeah, humans try to avoid it too. But when it happens, we can't just delete it from memory, so we live with it. Sometimes we laugh about it later. Her feathers shifted again, that faint golden shimmer running along the tips. That is admirable. It means you can survive more than we can. Mark raised an eyebrow. Pretty sure you've got spaceships, energy weapons, and a mind-reading sphere. I think you'll survive just fine. But Sarai didn't look convinced. She reached out and touched the sphere again, and suddenly the pressure in his mind returned. This time, instead of pulling at his memories, she seemed to be feeling for something deeper, something in the way his thoughts connected. And then she saw it. The vision that appeared in the air wasn't just a single memory. It was a patchwork of moments, the face of his best friend after a dangerous mission, the relief of hearing his mother's voice after months away, the ache in his chest when he lost someone in battle, the quiet pride of completing a mission no one thought he'd survive. Sarai's hands tightened slightly on the sphere. "This is connection," she said quietly. Mark blinked. "What?" "These are not just your thoughts. They are tied to others. Your mind does not exist alone. It is shaped by the people around you." Mark thought for a moment. "Yeah, I guess that's true for everyone." "Not for us," she said. "We think as individuals. Even when we are in a group, our thoughts are our own. They do not change shape because of others. But yours shift constantly, like a river changing its path after rain." Mark smirked. "Sounds messy again." Her eyes softened. "It is messy, but it is beautiful." He wasn't sure what to say to that. He'd been called a lot of things in his life: reckless, stubborn, even charming when the mood struck. But no one had ever called his mind beautiful. Before he could reply, the door slid open. The older Avori officer returned, this time with a small group behind him. They spoke, quickly to Sarai, their tone urgent. She responded in short, clipped sentences. Mark caught a few words. He didn't know their language well, but the tone was obvious. Disagreement. Finally, the older officer stepped forward and looked at Mark. In heavily accented English, he said, "The reading is over. You will be moved." Mark sat up. "Moved where?" No answer, but Sarai stood her ground. "No, I am not finished." The officer's crest flared with irritation. "You are finished. This is not a place for indulgence." Mark noticed the way the officer looked at him, like he was a dangerous animal in a cage. Sarai didn't back down. "What I am learning here could change our understanding of them, of humans." The officer's feathers stiffened. "Understanding is not needed. Control is." There was a long silence. Then, without another word, the officer turned sharply and left, his group following him. Mark let out a slow breath. "Guess I'm not exactly popular around here." "They are afraid," Sarai said. "Of me? Of what you represent?" She walked closer, standing beside the sphere. "You think differently. You feel differently. And sometimes, that is more dangerous than weapons." Mark leaned forward. "And you're not afraid?" Sarai's crest shimmered faintly. "No. I am intrigued." For a while, they didn't speak. The silence wasn't tense. It was thoughtful. Then Sarai did something unexpected. She placed both hands on the sphere again, but this time, instead of pulling his thoughts out, she pushed something into his mind. It wasn't words. It was a feeling. Calm, warmth, a sense of deep stillness, like standing in a quiet forest under soft rain. Mark blinked. "What was that?" "A memory from my mind," she said. "It is how we share with each other. I wanted you to feel it." He sat back, stunned. "That was, wow, peaceful. That is our way. Calm, order, harmony." She looked at him intently. "But your way is different. You are storms, fire, change, and I think we may need that." Mark frowned. "Need it for what?" But Sarai only smiled faintly. "You will see." The lights in the room shifted again, the walls changing from soft gold to a pale silver. The sphere's glow dimmed, signaling the end of the session. Sarai stepped back, but her eyes stayed on him. "Tomorrow we will speak again. There is more I wish to see." Mark couldn't help himself. He grinned. "Careful. You keep looking into my head, you might start thinking like a human." Her feathers glowed faintly gold. Perhaps that would not be so bad. And for the first time, Mark wondered if he wasn't just a prisoner anymore. Maybe, just maybe, he was something else entirely. Mark didn't sleep much that night. The Avory cell they'd moved him to was quiet, clean, and strangely comfortable, but his mind was far from resting. He kept replaying the day in his head. Sarai's questions, her laughter, the way she looked at him like he was something rare. He'd been a prisoner before during training simulations, but this felt different. It didn't feel like he was being broken down for information. It felt like he was being studied. And the strangest part? He didn't mind. The door slid open early the next morning. Sarai stood there holding the sphere in her hands. "Come," she said simply. They walked through long, curved corridors lined with walls of shifting light. A few Avory passed by, their eyes lingering on Mark with a mixture of caution and curiosity. Some whispered to each other in their musical language, and Mark was pretty sure not all of the comments were friendly. Finally, they entered a different kind of room, not the interrogation chamber from before. This one had a high, open ceiling, and the walls were transparent, showing a sweeping view of the alien city outside. Mark stopped in his tracks. Whoa! The city stretched out in layers of crystal towers and floating platforms, connected by glowing bridges. Streams of bright-winged creatures darted between the buildings, and in the distance, the silver ocean reflected a sky streaked with violet clouds. "You live here?" Mark asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Yes," Sarai said. "This is Velis Prime, our capital." "It's beautiful," Mark said honestly. She placed the sphere on a low pedestal in the center of the room. "Sit," she instructed. Mark sat on one of the floating chairs. This time, when she touched the sphere, she didn't go digging through his memories right away. Instead, she let a soft wave of calm wash over him, just like she had done the day before. "Today," Sarai said, "I will show you my mind, and you will show me yours, not in fragments but in connection." Mark frowned. "Connection?" She looked at him steadily. "A bridge, two minds open at the same time." He hesitated. "That sounds risky." "It is," she admitted. "But without risk, there is no understanding." Mark took a deep breath. "All right, let's do it." The moment her fingers pressed into the sphere, something changed. Before, he'd felt her in his mind like a gentle presence, guiding the flow of his thoughts. Now it was different. This was two currents meeting, her thoughts and his, weaving together, like rivers joining into one. Images flickered between them, his memories, her memories, sometimes separate, sometimes overlapping. He saw himself as a boy, climbing a tree in his backyard. Then the image shifted, and he was suddenly standing on an Avory cliff, the wind carrying the scent of crystal pollen. He saw her learning to control her first mind-reading link. Then it shifted, and she was in his cadet classroom, struggling to understand a chalkboard full of human writing. Emotions flowed with the images. Her calm, ordered mind met his restless, unpredictable one. She felt his stubbornness, his humor, his flashes of fear and hope. And he felt her clarity, her sense of balance, her deep longing to understand more than she had been taught. When the link deepened, something unexpected happened. She began to feel the way he saw her, not just physically, but through the way his mind made connections. To him, her golden crest feathers reminded him of sunsets back home. The sound of her voice made him think of wind chimes his grandmother used to hang on the porch. Sarai paused inside the link. "You compare me to your home?" she said softly. "Yeah," Mark admitted. "I guess I do. That is strange and warm." They stayed in the link for what felt like hours, trading not just images but small flashes of thought. He sent her the thrill of scoring a winning point in a game. She sent him the satisfaction of building something perfectly balanced. He gave her the taste of sweet iced tea on a summer afternoon. She gave him the feeling of diving through cool air above her planet's ocean. At one point, Mark realized he was laughing, not out loud, but inside the link, because she'd accidentally picked up one of his more ridiculous mental pictures. A drawing of her wearing a baseball cap backwards trying to eat pizza. "You're impossible," she told him, but there was no annoyance in her voice, only amusement. When they finally broke the link, Mark felt both drained and energized at the same time. It was like running a marathon and watching a sunrise all at once. Sarai studied him carefully. "Now you see why your mind is dangerous to them," she said. "Because I make jokes?" Mark asked. "Because you change the shape of everything. You touch. Even me." Before he could respond, the door to the room slid open and two Avori guards stepped in. Their expressions were stern. One of them spoke sharply to Sarai, and Mark recognized a few words. Something about the council. "They want you," Sarai explained. "Now." "Me? What for?" "They want to decide what is to be done with you." Mark stood. "And that's bad news, I'm guessing?" "Yes," she said quietly. "But I will be there." The walk to the council chamber was tense. The guards stayed close on either side of him, and Sarai walked just ahead, her crest feathers rigid with focus. The chamber itself was massive, shaped like a great circle with tiers of crystal seating. Dozens of Avori filled the seats, their robes shimmering in shades of silver and blue. At the center, a raised platform glowed faintly. Mark was guided to stand there. Sarai took her place a few steps behind him. An older Avori at the highest seat spoke first, his voice deep and commanding. "You are human," he said in accented English. "You were found during conflict. You are a soldier. By our law, you are an enemy." Mark stayed silent, but Sarai says you are different. The elder's eyes narrowed. "We do not yet know if that is a danger or an opportunity," the council murmured among themselves. Some looked skeptical. Others looked curious. Sarai stepped forward. "He is more than a soldier. His mind is unlike ours. It is creative, unpredictable, connected to emotion in a way we do not understand. I believe this difference could benefit us," one council member scoffed, "or destroy us. Unpredictable minds are unstable," another leaned forward. "What if others of his kind are the same?" "They are," Sarai said firmly, "and that is why we must learn from them, not just fight them." The chamber buzzed with low conversation. Mark stood still, trying to keep his thoughts from betraying his nerves, but of course, one slipped through. An image of himself as a cartoon character holding a giant "not guilty" sign. A few council members glanced at the floating image. Above him, confused. Sarai's feathers twitched, and Mark swore she was trying not to laugh. Finally, the elder raised a hand for silence. "We will consider what has been said. Until then, the human will remain under Sarai's supervision. But any harm or disruption, and the decision will change." The session ended, and the guards escorted them back out. As they walked away from the chamber, Mark let out a breath. "Well, that could have gone worse." "Yes," Sarai said. "It could have gone much worse. But you must be careful. You are not safe yet." Mark looked at her. "And you? Are you safe?" She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Not anymore." The days after the council meeting felt like living on a knife's edge. Mark was still technically a prisoner, but he was allowed to walk in certain parts of the Avori capital as long as Sarai was with him. He wasn't sure if that was because they trusted her, or because they wanted to watch him. Either way, everywhere they went, eyes followed him. Some Ivori stared at him with open curiosity. Others kept their distance, as if his very presence might be dangerous. And a few looked at him like he was a mistake waiting to happen. Sarai didn't seem bothered by the attention. She kept asking him questions about Earth, about human customs, about the way people made decisions based on feelings instead of pure logic. Sometimes she would ask for a memory, and he would let her see it through the sphere. One afternoon, they sat in a garden filled with tall, glass-like flowers that chimed softly when the wind moved through them. The light from the twin suns turned, the petals into sheets of gold and violet. Mark leaned back on the floating bench. You know, if your people saw this place through human eyes, they'd be even more proud of it. Sarai tilted her head. What do you mean? You see it as beautiful in a perfect way, balanced. But when I look at it, I see something else too. I see how it feels, the sound of the flowers, the warmth of the sun, the way the colors change when you move. She looked thoughtful. You add layers that are not there. Or maybe you've just forgotten how to see them, Mark said gently. The next day, Sarai brought him somewhere new. It was a wide, empty hall lined with great windows overlooking the ocean. In the center was a long table made of clear crystal, and at least 20 council members were seated around it. Mark's stomach tightened. Is this... Yes, Sarai said quietly. They have called for the treaty vote today. The treaty. That was what all of this had been building toward. If the council rejected it, the war between the Ivori and Earth would continue. If they approved it, there might finally be peace. Mark was guided to stand in the middle of the room. Sarai took her place beside him, the sphere glowing faintly in her hands. The elder who had spoken before addressed the council. We have studied the human. We have debated. Now we will decide whether this one's kind is to be seen as threat or ally. Murmurs filled the room. Some council members glanced at Mark with suspicion. Others seemed unsure. Sarai stepped forward. I have read his mind. I have seen his thoughts, his failures, his humor, his grief, his joy. He is not perfect, but perfection is not what we need. A tall council member scoffed. And what do we need, Sarai? Chaos? Change, she said simply. For too long, we have lived in balance so perfect that we have stopped growing. We remember events without feeling. We make choices without passion. We fear what is not ordered. But humans, she glanced at Mark, then back to the council. Humans remember meaning. They learn from pain. They find light in mistakes. They connect with each other so strongly that they will risk everything to protect those bonds. That is strength we have lost. Mark felt every eye in the room on him. He tried to keep his thoughts calm, but of course one slipped through. A mental image of himself standing here in a superhero cape giving a thumbs up. A few council members looked confused, but one of them, one Mark hadn't seen smile before, let out the smallest laugh. Sarai continued. If we destroy them, we destroy what they might teach us. If we make them allies, we gain not just their technology or their soldiers, but their perspective. The elder frowned. And you believe this one man represents them all? No, Sarai said. But he has shown me that if even one human can change my mind, perhaps others can change yours. The room fell into silence. The council members whispered among themselves, some gesturing toward the sphere, others toward Mark. Finally, the elder raised his hand. Let us see what he is, not in your words, but in truth. Sarai looked at Mark. May I? He nodded. She placed her hands on the sphere. The lights inside swirled and his thoughts spilled into the air. Not just random moments, but the ones he chose to share. The day he graduated from training, feeling like the world was open before him. The first time he saw Earth from orbit, his breath catching in awe. The moment he lost a friend in battle, and the quiet promise he made to honor them. The way he thought of Sarai's laughter as sunlight in the rain. The images floated above, the table, shifting slowly. And with them came the emotions, raw, unfiltered, impossible to fake. The council members watched in silence. Mark didn't try to hide anything. For once, he let his mind be wide open. When the images faded, the elder stood. "You are different," he said slowly. "Perhaps your kind is as well. This council will vote." The vote was quick. Out of the 20 members, 14 raised their hands in favor of peace. 6 did not. But 14 was enough. The elder spoke again. "The treaty will be signed. Hostilities will end, and humans will be treated as allies." Mark let out a slow breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The session ended and the council members filed out. When the last one left, Mark turned to Sarai. "You did it," she shook her head. "We did it," he smiled. "Guess my messy human brain was good for something after all." Sarai's feathers shimmered with gold. "More than something. You reminded me that imperfection can be perfect in its own way." They left the hall together, walking into the bright light of the alien city. Somewhere above, the twin suns were beginning to set, turning the sky into shades of fire and rose. For the first time since his capture, Mark didn't feel like a prisoner. He felt like a bridge, one that had been built between two worlds, strong enough to carry the weight of peace.